This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm Jamie Bogner. This is episode 234 of the podcast. We are still in Belgium for this one. Joe Stang, of course, is co-hosting along with me. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you.
We are excited to be sitting here in the new tasting, well, new-ish, but not new since you were here last time, Joe.
Yeah, it's very cool to be sitting here in the Tilquin tasting room.
The Tilquin tasting room. Yeah. Pierre Tilquin has joined us for the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Pierre.
Hello.
We are also, it's a nice auspicious time to be here because there is this is brew number 4 on the new brew house.
Yes, we just brewed the fourth time today. We started 2 weeks ago. So it's a very small brew kit, new turbid mash system, and we just pumped the wort on the cool ship just before you arrived.
So as we are talking here, the 4th batch ever of brewed lambic from Tilquin is cooling in the cool ship. It'll be, we saw it earlier. It's such a beautiful thing to watch wort cooling in the open air like that.
Yes, when I did the first brew, it was very emotional for me. When we sent the first wort in the cool ship, it was a fantastic feeling.
I bet, especially for something at this point in the moving from a blendery to a brewery and a blendery after 10 years, 11 years of operation. It's been a journey to get here. We're going to talk about all of that. We're going to talk about the process of blending, of aging on fruit. We're going to talk about the process of brewing. We're going to talk about the characters, of the lambic beers that find their way into the blends that Pierre makes. We'll talk about some of their process around making fruited lambic beers, and we will get through a lot of those similar topics. But first, what if you could chill your beer with a more efficient chiller? The answer, G&D Chiller's new micro-channel condensers. G&D's micro-channel condensers are highly efficient in hotter regions, use a fraction of the refrigerant over traditional chillers, which provides less opportunity for leaks, along with a lower global warming potential. G&D Chiller's engineers are committed to green technology design while developing a more energy-efficient chiller for the brewing industry. Contact G&D Chillers today at gdchillers.com. Also, support for this episode comes from BSG. Did you know that BSG sources hops directly from growers and processes them in their FSSC-certified facility in Yakima Valley? From Azaka to Zappa, BSG's hops are pelletized for optimal dispersion in the boiler, or FV, and packaged in nitrogen-flushed bags to preserve all those tasty and enticing aromatics. To learn more about how your hops go from farmer to fermenter, get in touch with BSG at Let's Talk Hops at bsgcraft.com. Pierre, let's start off talking about history. Let's talk about your history and following the path that you took to get here and starting your own blendery and now brewery and blendery.
So I have a specific background, I would say. I studied bioengineer in animal breeding, which is nothing to do about brewing. And then I had the opportunity to do a PhD. I stayed at the university for quite long. I did a PhD for 6 years in statistical genetics. And during that PhD, I discovered lambic and discovered the traditional Gueuze by tasting old bottles at the grandfather of my ex-wife. I visited Cantillon. I visited Trefontaine with Armand. And I had a sort of a direct love for that type of beer. And I found that very fascinating because nothing is totally understood. There's still something to understand. There's still a lot to learn about lambic and spontaneous fermentation. So I started to develop my passion about lambic. And after my PhD, I wanted to come back to that sort of word, I would say. And I didn't find a job directly in the Lambic brewery, but I had the opportunity to learn to brew at the Heug brewery, the Delirium Tremens. Then I went for 6 months in Trefontaine to learn to blend and brew Lambic with Armand de Belder. And then I had the opportunity to have 6 months at Cantillon to learn another way of working with lambic and blending with Jean Van Roy. And after these 2 experiences, I came to the conclusion that I couldn't stay in these small factories. My character was a bit strong, I would say, and that this is not a place for a lot of creativity, I would say. If there is a boss, there's only one. And so I started to dream about creating my own blendery. Took some time to do the business plan, to find the associates, to put some money, and then I could start in January 2009. I signed the rent outside of Brussels, 30 kilometers from Brussels, because I'm living there, but my business plan was not working well in Brussels. The rents were too high. So I started in the Walloon region, 30 kilometers from Brussels, in the Seine Valley, but 300 meters from the language border. Usually we say the Lambic and the Gueuze region is the Pajottenland, the Seine Valley, and Brussels. And I'm just below that region at 300 meters, so it's a bit controversial, but it's not so easy to find argument because there's only 300 meters. So I installed my blendery here and started to stock Lambic in wooden barrels in January 2009.
So rather than brew right away, you focused on a blending strategy where you would buy wort from other existing lambic producers and then age it yourself and blend it. Why not start brewing from the start?
Because the immobilization of money and
Right.
beer is already huge when you start a blendery. If I had to start a brewery, I would have to invest much more in a brew kit that would only be used in the winter, and at the start I would only use it 10 or 15 times, and then I would have to wait 1 year to use it again. So it was a too huge investment. So I decided to start blending only, and also it was I never thought about brewing. In fact, I had the chance to work with different lambics. The one of Cantillon, the one at Drifontaine, I was working with Beaune, Lindemans, Girardin, and I discovered the wonderful palette of different tastes you can find in lambics, and I found it was much more interesting to blend than to brew my own, because you have such a rich flavor profile you can get from different lambics and blending these lambics together gives something unique and much more round and complete in taste than having only one sort of lambic. I'm quite happy to start brewing, and I hope I will get a nice one. But I think blending is so interesting in the different tastes you can get that I wanted to start blending. That was quite obvious for me.
And that strategy has allowed for a gradual growth where you were able to fill a certain amount of barrels, build an idea of the brand over several years, and then increase the amount of volume you sold and create more money organically that you can then reinvest in the business to buy more barrels and buy more wort and grow it on a more slow kind of scale.
Yeah, exactly. I started in 2009 with the objective of producing in May 11 or selling in 11 500 hectoliters. And so I was needing 220 barrels at the start. So that was my business plan. With 500 hectoliters, I was able to pay myself and pay 2 workers in the winter. And then I was only renting 2 buildings at the back of this building now. Then progressively, I increased the stock. I could rent 1 more, and then rapidly the owner proposed me to buy the whole building, which is a 1,200 square meter building with some small office and tasting space in front. And I could increase the production. So now we have 650 barrels, and we are reaching we reached last year in 2021, 1,900 hectoliters. So in a bit more than 10 years, we came from 500 to 1,900. But I think we reached the maximum capacity of the building. If you have seen inside, it's a bit full. We can't push the walls, so we're gonna stay with that, I think.
This idea of buying wort. Now, with our experience in talking to Belgian brewers, there's often an initial reaction of, and Val and Paula at Atrium were telling us this, that the general Belgian mentality is no, you shouldn't do that until you do it and until people see you doing it, and then when it's good, they want to support it. For you launching a new blendery, going to a lambic brewer and saying, I want you to sell me a whole bunch of wort that I'm going to build my business off of. How did you do that?
Not everybody was positive directly, but
Sure,
I have the chance that in the lambic world there's a sort of tradition of blending.
Right.
We are a bit more now, but when I started, I was the fifth. There is the Cam out Beersel, Fontaine, Hansens, and then myself. I left Cantillon with the promise of Jean that if I start a blendery, he would supply me one brew, which was a very good start for starting, because Cantillon has such a reputation, and I had the chance to learn the job of blending lambic at the two best on the market. So I started with a very nice advantage, I would say.
Sure, that's
and
a
then,
good pedigree to come with, having worked at both of.
Exactly, and then I went to Bohn and Lindemans. They are very used to sell wort. The more difficult to convince was Girardin. It took me 1 year to convince him because he didn't want to sell me wort. He was taking me like a very rich guy, and he was saying that in Flemish, "Je bent een rijke P," which means you are a very rich guy that can start this.
We might call that in English like a dilettante, someone who wasn't serious but had a lot of money. Yeah,
and it was not the case. I was just clever enough to make a good business plan.
Right.
I was not owning at the start. I was not owning the whole company. I had only 30% of the shares. So it took me 1 year to convince him, and he was not understanding that I was willing to age his lambic for 3 years, for example, because he's doing blends of 1 and 2 years old only. So, but after a certain times, by coming back, he accepted, and I really appreciate that. And they are very nice, and it's a nice couple, AD and Paul. They are very kind persons, and I'm very happy to be able to buy 5 or 6 brews per year now.
Let's talk a little bit about each of those producers, lambic producers, and the flavors of that wort, because as you say, building that blend of all of these components, each one of them have not only different flavors, but also tend to function in different ways as they age. They work differently over time, and you have some real strategies about how you use each of the lambic components from those breweries. Let's talk about that. But first, supply chain challenges are here to stay for a while. So why not trust the experts to handle freight for your ingredients? Old Orchard has partnered with a leading logistics firm in the craft beverage industry to transport your craft concentrate blends. When you order 2 pails or more of concentrate from Old Orchard, you qualify for freight quotes from various carriers and can stay up to date on the status of your shipment. To get started on a freight quote for craft concentrates today, head on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, as craft beer's most trusted point of sale system, Arrived is the mobile all-in-one solution you need to decrease service friction and increase guest satisfaction. With a full suite of craft-specific features, no contracts, and no monthly fees, Arrived provides the necessary tools to help your brewery grow. Go to arrived.com to set up a free customized demo. That's arrived.com, ARRYVED.com. Remember, there is no I in Arrived. Pierre, at the top, you talked about how each one of these component blends, each of these lambic brewers and the wort that you get from them that you then age, works in different kinds of ways and builds a bigger, more round idea of flavor. I would love to hear from you how you might describe, from a flavor or sensory perspective, what each of those producers' wort contributes to the overall thing.
So to be precise, what contributes to the overall thing is especially the final lambic of each. I do get worts. All the worts are, when you get them, they are looking the same.
Yeah.
But what differentiate them is for sure the amount of hop, the process they use. So the profile of sugar might be a bit different, but the biggest difference is coming from the microflora. Each of them has a specific microflora, which is giving a specific taste and a specific final gravity of the lambic. Some, for example, the bone in my facility, but it's only in my facility because I use small barrels of 400 liters. The bone lambic is fermenting quite fast, and after 1 year, it's nearly totally fermented. It's a very nice lambic, a bit citrusy, not very complex, but very easy to drink. And when you start a blend, you have to have some volume to your blend, and bone is very good for that. But it can also be complex and nice. And then, for example, the Lindemans that I use is more on the grain side, on the malt side. Is more. It has sometimes some bread flavors, some diacetyl, but it's not an issue in lambic. It's metabolized in the refermentation, and it's nice to have some mellowness from the diacetyl in a blend. And this Lindemans is fermenting. It's one of the most stable and always the same in the rhythm of fermentation. It's fermenting after 4 or 5 days, and it's reaching always, in average, the same level of fermentation. You can have some more sugar left, some more residual sugar, and it's aging quite well because the residual sugar are still there, so it's still evolving by aging. And so the Lindemans is also a very nice lambic that I use as 1 and 2 years old. It could age very nicely as 3 years old, but I use Girardin and Cantillon for the 3 years old, so I had enough 3 years old possibilities, I would say. The Girardin lambic is brewed in a very specific way in an old brewing farm in Payoderland, and they use a bit more hops. So the final lambic is more bitter, so it's aging quite well. It's more protected by the hops, by the bacteriostatic properties of the overage hops, and it's fermenting a bit in between the bone and Lindemans. It can end up at 1.5 plateau, and then so it's aging quite well. I use it as 2 and 3 years old lambics. Then you have the Cantillon, which is fermenting, which is very specific. I assume people that like Gueuze can recognize the Cantillon blind because it's very specific taste. And in my facility, the Cantillon lambic is fermenting quite slowly, and it's ending at quite high in sugar. It can end up at 3 plateau, for example. And so I use the Cantillon as 3 years old, hoping to have the chance to reach what they call the Cantillon Grand Cru Bruxelles, which is their 3 years old lambic they put on bottle, which is very nice. Sometimes I have that quality level in my own lambics of Cantillon, sometimes not, but that's not a big issue. And so I use Beaune and Lindemans as 1 year old, Lindemans Girardin 2 years old, and Girardin Cantillon 3 years old. The specificity of my blendery is that I don't function at all as a single producer. If you know a bit about lambic, normally the young lambic is bringing sugar, and the old ones contain some Brettanomyces, and altogether they restart a fermentation in bottle. But in my situation, sometimes it's the old lambic that are bringing sugar because the young one
Right.
from Beaune that I use is super low in sugar.
Right.
And some Cantillon are a 3 plateau, and the residual sugar of the Cantillon are used for re-fermenting in the bottle by the yeast of Beaune. So it's a bit simplest maybe to explain that like that, but we are doing a lot of measurement of the sugar content of each lambic, and we try to reach a certain level of sugar before bottling, because we want to reach a certain level of carbonation. And I have the chance that nearly all my bottles are going to 0 plateau in the bottle, so it's quite easy to calculate.
We saw those marks as you mark each barrel every year. You said in November you take a gravity reading from each barrel and mark that gravity reading so that you can track that year over year and see how it's developing and making sure that it is developing.
Yeah, it's we try not to touch too much at the barrels, but we do once a year a measurement of the gravity to see how far they are in fermentation. And the rules I explained just before are the theoretical rules, but the funny thing and the passionating thing with Lambic is that every year is different. So, for example, for the moment I use 3 years old Cantillon that is at 0 plateau. And I have no idea why. It was new barrels second hand from Italy. Maybe I get some yeast from the barrels, but I clean them, so I clean them a lot with high pressure water, so I don't understand why. But that's the magic of Lambic. You don't control. And sometimes you have surprises, and sometimes it's following what you expect.
I think there's another really interesting component besides those lambics that you talked about. And it goes into one of my favorite beers. I'm not even going to say one of my favorite Gueuses, but one of my favorite beers is your draft Gueuze, the draft version. It's a lighter Gueuze, and it's, I don't even think diluted is the right word. It's made lighter by a different component. And as a result, it's really drinkable, very refreshing. And I don't like to think of Gueuze as something precious, but in reality it is. And then this is a chance to drink a less precious Gueuze, drink it like you can drink beer, and it's wonderful. Can you talk about what goes into that Gueuze?
So yeah, since the start, at the very start of the blendery, I wanted to do a draft beer because there is a demand for that. But I also want to respect the tradition, and I use the appellation Eau de Gueuze or Gueuze à l'ancienne, which is protected by the European Union. It's a traditional specialty guaranteed. There's a small logo at the back of the label. This product, the old Gueuze, can't be put on draft, so I had to do a different blend. And I had the idea of ordering to bone a very special lambic, which is called Meert. Meert is a low ABV lambic, which is just obtained by less grains now, but in the past it was obtained by the second runnings on the grains. The first wort was set apart and was called Lambic. The second runnings was like a March beer, and in the local region we call that Meert. It was used on the side, and it was used for an easy to drink lambic on the field, or to blend with lambic and produce faro. But so I ordered that specific brew to Frank Bohn, and he delivered me a wort of at 8 plateau around, and it reached 3.64% alcohol. And I use 50% of that Meert for the blend of the Gueuze on draft, and then the other 50% is 1 year old and 2 years old lambics of Cantillon, of Girardin and Lindemans. So it gives a very lower ABV and a very easy to drink Gueuze. That was the objective. I do appreciate some blends that you can find on the market that are only made with 1 and 2 years old lambics. They're a bit less complex, but they have much more drinkability.
Sure. Let's talk about barrels a little bit, because back to that subject, you use multiple different size barrels, and you tend to choose size of barrel to based on the kind of age that you intend for that wort, straight out. Talk to me a little bit about that strategy.
So I don't have that much different sizes of barrels, but I have 400 liter barrels that are second-hand from red wine. They are 27 millimeters thick. They are a bit thicker than small Bordeaux barrels or Bourgogne barrels that are 21 millimeters. And these are the biggest part of my barrel stock, 400 liter, that I use them for 1 and 2 years old lambics. Then I had the chance recently, it's since a bit more than 3 years now that I can reach some demi-mouille. We call that demi-mouille. They are 600 liter barrels. They are much thicker. They are 44 millimeters thick. And they give less oxygenation, so they are ideal for aging a bit longer, the lambic. And I'm progressively trying to renew some of the 400-liter barrels and change them to 600. I already renewed 320 400-liter barrels in 10 years, after 10 years use. But I'm also buying 600-liter ones for the aging of 2 and 3 years old lambics. And these are, as they give less oxygen, they give less risk of acidification and a development of vinegar flavors. That's something I try to avoid as much as possible in my blends, because I consider that if you taste something, if it's burning your throat, if there is a vinegar flavor, then you made a mistake. It's just a sign of a work which was not very clean, I would say. And it can happen. I do have that sort of flavor in my lambics, and I have to mention that we are sometimes happy to have 1 barrel of about 10 having that sort of flavor, because we say it's giving a kick to the blend. It's giving some fruitiness when you mix it. But if it's too much, it's a mistake. If it's too tasty, if it's the major part of your flavor, then from my point of view, it's not pleasant.
The goal is not to make a more sour beer.
No, the objective is to make a pleasant, mellow sour beers, and not an overpowerful sour beer, like some beers you can find in US. If I can joke about that.
We can accept that. We can accept that. Talk to me about your barrel cleaning process and preparation process. You know, certainly there's some debate out there in the world of how much, of this fermentation, spontaneous fermentation, is driven by open air versus maybe latent cultures living in wood. If your point is to develop multiple cultures that have their own flavor, you certainly don't want all of this that you're buying from 5 different lambic brewers to all taste exactly the same. The goal is to have different flavored wort, stock and lambic to work with. Talk to me about how you prep those barrels to keep a neutral palate for this, and over time, how much may actually still be impacted by some culture that may live on?
But that's a very interesting question, and I changed my way of cleaning barrels something like 4 or 5 years ago. I was not using steam at the start.
Yeah.
I was only cleaning with high pressure hot water. I have a very standard method. I have a high pressure hot water system which is working 5 minutes at 30 Celsius, then 2 times 5 minutes at 60, and then 5 minutes at 80 Celsius. And then I was just leaving the barrels drying and then sulfuring them, which means to burn sulfur inside, a small ring of sulfur that you just light on and burn inside. But with the time, I saw some discrepancy between regarding the what I explained before. I was saying Cantillon normally stops at quite high in sugar. At 3 plateau, Beaune is going to 0, and the other 2 others are in between. And inside one delivery of Cantillon, for example, or Lindemans, I was seeing some barrels super low and some barrels quite high. So I started to think there is an effect of the barrels that is developing, and my way of cleaning barrels is not sufficient, because I want to keep, and it's very specific to my blendery and to have a blendery. If you want to keep the specific taste of each lambic, you have to avoid the impact of the previous lambic. I don't have enough space to keep the barrels, specific barrels for each specific producer. It was not possible. In a practical way. When you have enough empty barrels, you hold a wort and you have to fill them. And you can't keep the Cantillon barrels on the side, the Beaune on the side, and so on. So I had to find a solution. And we started to use a steam, something like that other colleagues are using. And we now steam for 15 minutes. And by doing that, we nearly kill everything. And we keep the terroir of each producer by doing that. But we still have some surprises every year. it's linked to the lambic. It's something that you don't control, but it's very important in my situation to clean as much as possible. Yeah.
I hadn't thought about how you could use different barrels from the same batch as a kind of control to measure that kind of thing, but that's interesting.
But if you have 15 barrels of one brew
Right.
that were filled on one day, and if you have variation from 3 to 0 plateau, then there's something strange.
Sure. No,
So-
that makes a lot of sense. As you age barrels, how do you allow temperature to fluctuate in your warehouse? Do you allow? I mean, seasons change here, but we're here in the winter. It's cold, but it's not too cold, and summertime, temperatures certainly are warmer. Do you keep that consistent, or what's your strategy for that?
For the moment, I have a temperature controlling system only for the summer, and it never goes higher than 19 Celsius. So the cooling starts at 20 to cool the hair at 19. So the maximum temperature that the lambic can reach is 19 Celsius.
For American listeners, that's about 66 degrees Fahrenheit.
And in the winter, I don't control. At the start, I was having some warming system, but my insurance company doesn't want me to use that anymore. So it's with gas. So it was not the best idea. But the isolation of the building is quite good enough so that we don't go below 12 in the barrel room, 12 Celsius. So it's only between 12 and 19. I found it important to have a sort of a mimicking of the summer, because when we speak about age of lambic, we always consider the number of summer that the lambic went through. So a 2 years old lambic is a lambic with 2 summers, and 3 years old is 3 summers, because the summer is giving age, because you have this increase of temperature, which is favoring a bit the growth of acetic acid bacteria, which can influence the taste and give some more complexity. And also it has an impact of the development of Brettanomyces, the temperature. So the warmness is a bit important, I think. But every year I hesitate when I have to fix the temperature value on my system. And
Right.
every year I want to change. So I might decrease a bit in the next
Decrease.
I mean, to put it at 17 or 18
Yeah.
Celsius, because I want to avoid as much as possible the acetic acid development in my barrels. And for example, this year I have a bit more than expected, and I realized to put a bit more barrels to the drain, which is not so funny. But I put a lot of effort to control that, to clean the barrels as much as possible. We do the topping of the barrels also. By topping the barrels before the summer, you decrease the amount of oxygen on top of the beer, and if your barrels are whole full, you have less oxygen contact. We do that every year, the topping.
And you top those with lambic from the same
From the
batch.
same and from the same producer, same age.
So you'll just basically take another barrel and then fill the other barrels with what was in that barrel in order to top them up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We end up sometimes with half barrels, but then we have to blend the two lambics, and it gives some specific barrels with two producers.
Very cool. Very cool. And then when you start building a blend, this is also a seasonal process, because your beer barrels need to be empty in time for wort coming from the new season to fill into them. And so there's a rhythm then through the year to when you empty barrels and build your blends. But let's talk about that process of building a blend. I know for some there's a romantic notion of this, but you are more mathematical in your approach.
Yeah, I learned the job at Driefontein and Cantillon, and I learned a certain way of blending. And then, to be honest, at the start I was blending like I learned from them. But I don't know if you ever heard of a specific Gueuze I made, which was called Gueuze to the square.
Yes.
And
I actually still have a bottle of the first version of that in my fridge at home.
And that Gueuze is wonderful, but it's coming from a mistake. I had to empty 20,000 small bottles of Gueuze because they were overcarbonated.
Yeah.
Because I made a blend a bit like I learned, I would say, in an artistic way, and and maybe it's easy to say that I should have measured a bit more, but in advance. But I realized that some of the re-fermentation in the bottle could go crazy and make the beer totally overcarbonated. So after that I had to understand a bit more and to make more measurement, and so I started to develop a different way of blending. The taste is very important for sure. So we taste every lambic. We choose. We start to choose some young lambic, born Lindemans for the most of the time. Sometimes we use a young Girardin. It can happen if we have to empty that because it's in the way, but most of the time
because it's in the way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the ideal proportion I want to reach. Sometimes I have to do some mistake in that ideal proportion, I would say, because you have to empty some space to get new wort. You have to to have enough space on the ground to receive a full delivery of bone. For example, bone and Lindemans, they are delivering by 12,000 liters, so you have to fill 30 barrels of 400 liter in one day, and you have to have the space. So sometimes you have to empty some barrels that you would prefer to leave. I'm not using racks like some US breweries that can move the barrels with the forklift. I have a very traditional way of putting barrels, and I put 4 layers. So sometimes you have practical implication. You have to empty what's on top before to empty what's under.
Sure.
So when we start doing a blend, we take the 1-year-old lambics, we taste them, we taste the oldest as possible. So for example, we usually receive lambics in December from Beaune and Lindemans. So we take these 2 batch first because they are more complex, more further in fermentation. And so at the beginning of the season, we take these ones. At the end of the season, we take the ones from February and March. But sometimes we have to take both of them because we always have in mind that we have to reach a certain level of sugar in the blend. And that makes my way of blending a bit more scientific. We measure every barrels. We measure their sugar content in plateau. We have a very specific Excel sheet which is making a weighted average of all the different values of plateau according to the volume of each, so that we can calculate in advance on a paper or on an Excel sheet what will be the expected sugar content of the blend before bottling. And by doing that, we can choose. Sometimes we go in the barrel room and we search for sugar, and sometimes we search for low lambic. and
sure. For what you need to get it where it should be. Yeah.
So it's a bit strange. It's not so poetic as people would expect, I would say. But we try to produce something consistent. I mean, we try to have a Tilquin Gueuze, because it's our main product and our preferred product. We try to have a Tilquin Gueuze, which has the best quality as possible, and which is a bit standard, not standardized, but which is quite consistent. And so we put a lot of effort to choose the good lambics. So we take 1 and 2 years old lambics, and then when you have a good blend of 1 year old lambic, you put some more complexity by adding some old lambics. And the old lambics are giving some wood character, some vanilla character that you can get from the oak, and sometimes some bitterness and some fruitiness, a lot of fruitiness. And we take 2 years old Lindemans and 2 years old Girardin. Sometimes we have a chance to have some what we call the bone Lindemans. We sometimes blend. If we have too much bone at the end of the season, we do a 50% blend and we put it back in barrels, and it gives very nice lambics also. So we use that as 2 years old, and then we choose the 3 years old lambics that are giving a lot of complexity. They are very strong in taste. Sometimes these are lambics that they are so strong in taste that you can't imagine to drink a full glass. It's so flavorful, a lot of oak character, vanilla. It's super tasty, but it's nice to blend. Sometimes we choose some lambic with a touch of vinegar because it's we call that to give a kick to the blend. So it's like giving some character to a blend, and the acetic acid is, when it's diluted in a blend of 10 or 11 barrels, it's giving some fruitiness, and it's enhancing all the other taste also. It's very nice. Sometimes also we have some diacetyl in the blends, and we have that more in some old liniments, for example. But it's not a problem. It will be metabolized in the bottle. So yeah, it's the most funny part of the job. The morning tasting barrels, deciding the blend, and then the afternoon we pump.
So it's a very regimented process. Let's talk a little bit about adding fruit to beer, because that is something that you do extensively. We saw you have 20 metal stainless steel tanks out there that you do these in. And it's a very intentional process. Before we do that, from the rotatable pickup tube on Rogue Brewing's pilot brewhouse to the integrated hopbacks on Sierra Nevada's twin prototyping brewhouses, SS Brewtech has taken technology they invented working with world-renowned industry veterans and made them available to every craft brewer. To learn more about SS Brewtech's innovation list, head on over to ssbrewtech.com. Also, are you looking for the tools to make your next improvements in process and quality control? The Mettler Toledo InPro 8630i is the ideal sensor for combined color and turbidity measurement in lautering, filtration, and phase shift operations. Robust, compact, and easy to handle, it supports consistency in beer processing. The InTap portable oxygen meter gives you readings wherever you need them, flexible in production for verification, while purging or for troubleshooting. It's your perfect helping hand. Contact Mettler Toledo today to find out more. Let's talk about how you use fruit beer in your lambic. Earlier today, we had a Pinot Meunier. The grape lambics that you've made are fantastic. Of course, you use all sorts of fruits in the lambics you use. But let's talk a little bit about your philosophy towards using fruit, and then some of the methods that you use to add those fruits.
I use a specific method for doing my fruit beers. I always ferment in a high concentration of fruit in the tank. It's always the same, nearly 1,000 kilo of fruit in a 2,000 liter tank. So it's 50% fruit, 50% lambic. 1 year old lambic from Born Lindemans and a bit of Girardin. Some colleagues are fermenting with 2 years old lambic. I personally prefer to ferment with 1 year old lambic. And
why
then
is that because it'll re-ferment a little faster, or
it will bring some more life to ferment the fruits.
Fruit sugar, yeah.
But I assume 2 years old lambic can bring more Brettanomyces maybe, or more complex yeast. So it's also interesting for sure. But that's the way I work. I prefer to bring some complexity after by blending. So some colleagues are fermenting at the final concentration of fruit in the tank. So if you have a 2,000 liter tank, you usually 250 grams fruit per liter. So they put 500 kilo, and then they filter the beer, or they pump the beer, and then they bottle. I don't do that because I consider that it's very important to reach a certain level of fruitiness, which is not too strong, which is easy to drink. You have to recognize the fruit, but you also have to taste the lambic behind. And that's why I always ferment in a concentrate way, 1,000 kilo in 2,000 liter tank for 4 months. Then we pump the fruited lambic. We filter roughly in stainless steel filters. We filter that fruit lambic and we pump it in the blending tank. And then we do like the Gueuze. We take samples of the different lambics, 1, 2, and 3 years old lambics. And we do also different tests of dilution. When we know the fruit, we do usually a very small amount of dilutions. For example, the quetch, which is a plum lambic that I do, which is my corresponding creek, I would say. I have colleagues doing creek, a sherry one. I don't do a sherry one. I don't do a creek. I do a quetch, which with plums. And with the plums, we use around 200 to 250 grams fruit per liter. But when we start with a new fruit, we don't know what will be the intensity of the fruit. And we start with 100 grams fruit per liter, 150, 200, 250, 300. And we taste always from the lowest to the highest. And when we have a satisfying fruitiness, we stop. Because it's always tempting to put more fruit, to have some rich flavor, fruit profile. But at the end, you just produce a fruit juice if you just put more fruit. And you don't taste the beer behind.
So you do this smaller but intense maceration with this 50-50 blend of lambic and fruit, and then you pull off bench samples with the broader blend of lambic and figure out the exact ratio to where you feel happy with that blend in order to dial it exactly in.
Exactly. And sometimes we have two blending tanks of 42 hecto, so 4,200 liter. And if we want to do 238 grams fruit per liter, it's a full tank. But sometimes we do 200, we do 100, and then we use both tank, and we blend in both tanks. So we adapt always according to the fruit and according to the harvest. So every year is a bit different. So we have to test. If you follow the labels of my blendery, sometimes you see some differences. We go from 260 grams to 240. Sometimes it's only 20 grams difference, and there's something like a threshold. When we taste, we always do the blend. We are 3 minimum, and we are usually 4. I have 3 employees in the production team, and 1 which is in more practical stuff like cleaning barrels. We taste together, and we usually come to an agreement together because we see directly that there is a threshold. Sometimes we taste 250, and then we taste 300, and it's totally too much. And we fine tune to 260 or 270, and then we see if we do a difference of 10 grams. Sometimes there is a threshold, and it's totally different. And so I think I'm one of the only one doing that with so much details. But I think it's a question of taste, and it's also a question of an economical point of view. I mean, if you put 300 grams or 400 grams fruit per liter, you do you can do a small amount of bottles. If you put less fruit, you can do much more bottles. So, so that's something I don't understand. Some colleagues are doing beers at 600 grams fruit per liter, but then at the end it's not beer anymore. And they could have done so much more beer with that amount of fruit, and so much people could have tasted that beer, because we are in a geek world. The people are just looking for new beers all the time. So we experiment with new fruits. We make the effort of buying big amounts of specific fruits, and then at the end you just find a fruit juice on the market, which is, I don't see what's interesting in that. And you could have made much more beers, much more balanced, and you would have much more people happy to taste it.
How do you prep fruit? And it's going to differ for fruit, but for something like a plum and then something like a grape, what does that preparation process look like before it goes into the tank?
So for the grapes, we get them always fresh. Either local, the one you spoke about, the Pinot Meunier from a local winemaker next to the blendery. Sometimes we get them locals, and most of the time we get them from France. They are harvested on one day. They are transported on the night in a cool transport, and we have a destemming machine. We destem them in the morning, put them directly in the tanks, and cover them with lambic.
So no crush, no press, just straight.
It's the destemming machine is a bit squeezing the grapes, so they're open. And then for the plums, we get them fresh also and destoned, so that they are well open. They can be destoned like an olive or like here. They say in French, un oreillon. It means cut it in two, like when you do a pie. And so that you have the flesh of the fruit, which is well in contact with the lambic. So that's for the stone fruits. I try to get them fresh and destoned. And then for the small fruits, like the blackberry, which is our second main fruit beer, we do a mûr, which is a blackberry. We get them frozen. The small fruits are much more interesting to be used frozen.
Right.
First of all, because it's very difficult to get huge amount of fresh ones, but I've tested the difference. If you use fresh blackberries or frozen one, you get much more. The fruit flavor is much stronger. There's a bigger dilution of the fruit flavor when it's frozen than when it's fresh. But it's not true with the plums, for example. The plums frozen, they don't give a big difference, and they give an haziness to your beer, which is not very nice. But small fruit like black currants, like wild blueberry, like blackberries, elderberries, I use them frozen.
That's pretty more common now because it breaks down those cell walls and allows for that better extraction of flavor. Sure.
From the start with the fruit beers, doing the quetch instead of a kriek, your choices of fruit has always been really unusual. Are you testing out new fruits to see if it's something you want to do on a bigger scale, or how are you doing that now?
So at the start, I had intentionally I chose a fruit that is not used. I didn't want to use a sherry for producing kriek because everybody is doing that, and I wanted to get a bit more focus of the client. I mean, if you produce a new fruit, then you get more attention of the clients and of the beer fans. So that was the idea, and also the idea of the quetch was coming from my childhood. There was a plum tree in the garden of my parents, and it was exactly the small variety, the variety of that small plum, which is called prune de Namur, that I can't get anymore. But in the past, I did get good amounts of that small plums. Now I get the plums from Alsace. They are a bit bigger, but they have the same taste, so it's nice. But the idea was to use that sort of local fruit and to do something different than my colleagues. Then why not doing a framboise? I think the raspberry is the most uninteresting fruit to use for beer. It has such a strong flavor and too strong and so recognizable. I mean, it's nearly impossible to miss a raspberry beer because the fruit is so strong in taste that it always brings a big fruitiness. I mean, you can't make a mistake by using raspberry. But
It's too easy.
Yeah.
I think it's too easy. Yeah.
Okay.
That was my idea. And also because my colleagues are doing that also. So why not using a blackberry? It was not used in the past in Lambic. Now in US, many producers are using blackberries, and I have some colleagues now, Lambic Fabric, using blackberries. But in the past, it wasn't. And so, again, to get more attention of the geeks and of the beer fans, producing something else.
And that's where bananas came from then.
Yeah, the bananas was a joke with some friends that founded the Facebook group called Tilquin Enthusiast. And they came with an idea on the messenger group. We have an idea for you, Pierre. We're gonna produce a banana à l'ancienne. Okay, and then we had a meeting, and I said nothing, and I bought the fruits. I bought pineapples and bananas, and I said, "You have an idea? Then cut the fruits." And so we did that small experiment, which was a bit crazy. I wouldn't recommend anyone to do a banana beer, but. But to answer your question, yes, for sure, I do some tests. So every 2 years, in average, I buy 30 kilo of many different fruits. We did last year. We did 19 trials. We buy fruits. We have small plastic vessels of 60 liters. We use the same methodology as the big stainless steel tanks. 30 kilo fruit, 30 liter lambic. We do some experiment, and then we blend them the same way. We test the dilutions. So it takes a lot of time for producing 120 liters. The same time for producing the big batches, and we do a lot of tests here. So that's why we did once a blackcurrant. We did a mirabelle, which is a small yellow plum. We now have a rhubarb coming. We did 2 tests before. We have a wild cranberry coming. We did 2 tests before. So we are always testing different fruits. I think it's very fun and nice to play with fruits. And so these experimental batches are served on draft on festival. It's called Experimental Fruit Series number 1, 2, or 3. For the moment, we have 3 series of experiment here.
You mentioned a box set or a mixed box maybe coming out later this year. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so because of the COVID, we wanted to produce something else than draft beers because we have enough stock of kegs. We are very lucky compared to colleagues. Our kegged beer are aging very nicely, and they are even nicer 2 years old than young. So I'm very lucky in doing lambics, I would say, because the beers are aging very well. So the sales were decreased in the pandemic, but I had no beers to put to the drain. But I wanted to produce something else than the draft beer because I had enough stock, and we started to experiment with a second infusion of beer on the spent fruits. I think in grapes they call that pomace or something.
Mm-hmm.
But I would only speak about spent fruits. So the fruits were used once, and then we started to put beers on the fruit and see what it gives. We did some small batches in the 60 liter plastic tanks that I have, and we found that it was giving a lot of fruitiness still, and the fruits were still delivering flavors, and we found it interesting to develop that, and we did that large scale of last year, last winter, and we developed 9 different lightly fruited beers that are lower in alcohol because they are made with the Meers, the low ABV lambic that I use for the draft beers. And so we use 80% Meers infused on the fruits for 4 months, and then blended with 20% 2 years old lambic to give a bit more complexity and to allow the re-fermentation in bottle. And so it's going to be a box of 9 small bottles of 37.5 centiliters, and it will be called like a Meers series or something like that. And it's a wonderful taste experience because these beers are super drinkable, very easy to drink for the summer. I hope it will be appreciated.
Lower ABV, lighter fruit presence that balances with that kind of smaller beer.
Sounds terrible.
Sounds terrible.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, since we're here and you have wort now cooling in the cool ship behind us, I would love to talk just a little bit about this new program and this new chapter for Tilquin, which is brewing your own lambic beer and spontaneously inoculating it out in your little cool ship shed out behind the brewery. And then, of course, brewing your own. You've got some of that now in barrels already that's fermenting, even though you've only been at it for two weeks now. Let's talk about designing that program, designing a recipe, and then building a brewing process for that.
I don't have that much experience in brewing lambic, so I wanted to start small. I didn't make a business plan for building a big and huge brew kit. I wanted to start small with second-hand tanks and start something small that I can understand, and maybe develop a process that I could use in the future if one of my suppliers doesn't want to supply me anymore some wort. I might have to brew myself a bit more, but Yes, the idea has never been to change the blendery, but to develop for fun a small brewing activity on the side. And so it took a lot of time. I had the chance to meet the ex-head brewer of Brasserie de la Seine, Maxime Libouton, which is a friend of mine, and I could hire him for 4 months for helping me to build that small brew kit. So together we worked on that and built a small brew kit which is made for producing 1,000 liter final volume of wort. So filling 2 barrels of 500 liter. It's a very traditional brew kit, I would say. It's based a bit on the same process of Cantillon. It's called turbid mash with 2 cooking vessels, one in which we can put the turbid wort on the side during the mashing process. So we mash 40% wheat, raw wheat, 60% malted barley, with increasing temperature, different steps of mashing, like traditional steps. And we take always a small part of turbid wort during the 3 first steps, so that we can fix some dextrins and starch and avoid them to be dismantled by the enzymes. And also we make some space in the mashing vessels so that we can add some more hot water. And then we do the mash out with turbid wort at the end of the mashing. And then we start filtering clear wort, and then we can add the rest of the turbid wort. So it's a very traditional method.
Used aged hops also.
We use overage hops, 3 years old. And
3 years old?
Yes. That's for the moment we have the chance. We have 3 years old. It's getting difficult to get overage hops, and especially because I want to produce an organic lambic. So it's easy. It's more easy to find non-organic hops, overage hops. So I'm working on that to age myself the organic hops. But
do you buy hops from a specific grower or a specific place?
We are trying to buy them locally in Belgium, a small organic producer, but we are still in discussion. For the moment, I do have some local hops from Belgium, but that are not organic. I want to develop that small production of my own lambic is not made for producing big volumes. If I can produce something like 4 batches of Gueuze 100% Tilquin lambic, it would be nice. 4 or 5 batches. So it's not a big volume, but the objective is only to produce one single lambic and age that for 3, 2, and 1 years to be able in 3 years and a half to sell 100% Tilquin lambic Gueuze. So it's a very simple project, but long term. Like usual, at the end of the cooking, we put the wort on the cool ship for 1 night. We are still experimenting with the aeration systems to reach the good temperature in the morning. For the moment, we are around 30 Celsius in the mornings, which is quite nice. So yeah, and then we put that in barrels for fermentation. And we just saw 2 days ago that the fermentation started. So it's wonderful. We are very happy with the fact that we do have some life on this side of the language border. So it's nice.
We were so lucky with our timing here to get here, and we could smell it getting out of the car, and then to go back there where you've got this wooden house built for the cool ship, a little home for it, and the steam coming out like a sauna is just a really cool thing to see, and especially so early in the brewing project, batch number 4 today.
That has to be the most relieving thing to see for a lambic blender who is fermenting wort, to watch that foam come out of, and you've got a barrel system where you use pipes to keep it all clean as the foam comes out of the bung, and then drop it in front of the barrels.
I do have some pipes. Yeah, that's a system I use that I learned from Armand de Belder. I think it's important when you produce lambic you don't need to work in a very silly place to produce good lambics. I mean, you can work in a clean place, and the tradition is to get your barrels to let them overflow, and then. But it's nice when the foam is fresh, but when it's drying, you have a lot of flies and so on. It's not so hygienic, I would say. So I prefer to use some bunk that have a hole and a pipe that is directing the foam in a bucket on the side, so that I can close when the fermentation is the visible part of the fermentation is finished. I can just close with a bung and let them ripe for 1, 2, or 3 years. So that keeps the place clean and that avoids infections from the bung hole.
Sure. But as you watch that foam coming out, now you know that the culture is doing its work, and it's going to turn that wort into lambic for you.
Yeah, I use especially barrels that are 500 liters. So I spoke about the size of the barrels I use for the blendery, 400 and 600. For the brewing plan, I have 500 liter barrels that were never used for lambic. So I hope to get a specific taste and a specific microflora from the environment. So the cool ship is especially put outside in a small wooden shed, so that I hope to capture some microorganism from the air, from the countryside.
It won't pick up something that's inside the warehouse that way.
That was the idea.
Yeah.
Even though there will surely be an influence, I want to avoid that if possible.
That's really interesting. Putting this kind of difficult 2 years aside, what is your near-term goal? Clearly, you're brewing your own now, and that is a near-term goal. Are there near-term goals, and what's the big picture hope for Gueuzerie Tilquin?
As I told before, I think we reached quite the maximum capacity of the building. I don't want to build a huge business and a huge company with a lot of people working. I want to keep it at a human size. So maybe because I have my own limits also, I have 5 people working for me, and it's already challenging to deal with 5 people correctly. And I think I will be able to take 1 or 2 more. But that's for the size of the team. I don't think it's. I will need more than that. And the only plan is to increase the comfort of working and to increase the quality. For example, I want to renew the bottling line because I want to have a CO2 purge system in my bottles that I don't have for the moment. I want to isolate better the building, and on an environmental point of view, I want to decrease the loss of energy, the pollution, and so on. So the plan is to build, to improve the building in 5 years, if possible, and to build something on the side there, and have a better isolation of the side of the building, to build a new office, and if we can dismantle the current office, we will have a larger tap room, and to build a big tap room so that we can receive more people, maybe a good kitchen if we can, so that we can do some nice meals with beers once or twice every weekend. So to improve the building, to improve the comfort, to try to improve the quality and keep it constant at the minimum, and that's the objective for the coming years. And with the brewing installation, yes, if I can produce a Gueuze in 3 years and a half, which would be the name could be, for example, I want to keep a French name, so it could be called Gueuze du Tilleul, because Tilleul is the tree that you can find on the Tilquin beers, which is the meaning of the Tilquin name. Tilquin means little tilleul. Tilleul is a specific tree you can find in Europe. I don't think it's a name very easy to traduce in English. But so I could produce a Gueuze 100% Tilquin in 3 years and a half. It would be a wonderful result.
Well, I hope you do and hope you make that 100% Tilquin Gueuze that meets your exacting standards for it. And when you do, I know we can't wait to taste it. On that note, let's bring it to a close. For nearly 30 years, G&D Chillers has set the mark for quality equipment you can rely on. Explore a whole universe of hop sensory with unique varieties from BSG. Think outside the puree box with Old Orchard's craft concentrate blends. Arrived is the point-of-sale system designed specifically with breweries in mind. Put SS Brewtech's advances to work in your brew house, and Medler Toledo's InPro 8630i supports consistency in beer processing. If you enjoy this podcast every week, we'd love your support. Go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button, and if you're planning a brewery, head on over to breweryworkshop.com for information on our next workshop in Portland, Oregon this July. Pierre, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
If people would like to learn more about Gueuzerie Tilquin, where do they find you? Out on real life and on the internet?
In the real life, we are 30 kilometers southwest of Brussels. Not that easy to reach, but it's possible to reach by train and bus. Otherwise, you have to take a car. And we are open every Saturday morning from 10:30 to 1. We might open in the future the whole Saturday and maybe the Friday, but for the moment we are just open on Saturday mornings. And then on the social media, we have a website, gueuzerie-tilquin.be, and also we are quite active on Facebook and Instagram, and also on the Facebook group Tilquin Enthusiast. You will have specific question to answer to be able to access to that group, but I'm sure you will find the answers. So yeah, that's the way to reach the last news about Tilquin. It's to follow us on social media.
Well, we both enjoy your thoughtful approach to this, romantic beer style, and you're doing a fantastic job at it. Thank you so much for joining us. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers, guys.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.